Hey everyone, hopefully this is working properly. Uh, so I wanted to address this topic um, because the mainstream media is going crazy over uh, Trump and his tweeting, and I mean that's nothing new, of course. Um, for those of you who watched the what was it, the 60 Minutes interview, where the interviewer asked him, are they going to take away your Twitter account? You can't be tweeting while you're in office, and he hasn't seemed to be letting up at all. And it's really interesting because I see a lot of different responses online in terms of the things that Trump tweets about, and really the conversation about what he's saying hasn't changed much. Some of it's reactionary, some of it's supportive of what he's saying. But I wanted to kind of go over some of the recent tweets he's been making and look at, in my opinion, as to why he's making these tweets. Because a lot of people will say that he's reactionary, and that was kind of used as sort of an attack on him in terms of, can we really have a president who, reacts to people, attacking him through, bullying them over Twitter and so forth. But from my perspective, he's not reacting so much as he's actually using the platform of Twitter for a very specific purpose. If you've ever followed his career, he's a very successful person, clearly, but he's also very adaptable to the situation. And there's a lot of points you can go into in terms of his campaign message and how he shaped it over time and backed off on certain things and promoted other things in terms of policies and so forth. But in terms of his Twitter, I just want to read a couple things. I'm going to see if I can switch it around here. Let's see. Okay, so just looking at some of the tweets here. As many of you know, there was this whole debacle around Pence going to the the Hamilton show, and kind of getting booed and called out by the cast. And look here. He says, this was November 19th, which is, what was that? Yesterday. He says, I settled the Trump University lawsuit for a small fraction of the potential award because as president I have to focus on our country. For those of you who don't know, he did settle the lawsuit. People had sued him. I think it was a class action lawsuit, if I'm not mistaken, but he's being sued over apparent fraud at Trump University. Some students said they weren't satisfied. That's a whole other topic in itself. Personally, I think it was purely both, political and people who were just looking for money. They're basically losers who want to pretend like they got defrauded when in reality they probably didn't apply anything that they were taught. But notice he has this tweet about Trump settling Trump University, and then he says, the only bad thing about winning the presidency is that I did not have time to go through a long but winning trial on Trump U. Too bad. And it's interesting because a lot of the comments that I've seen about those statements is that, oh, look, he said he never settles lawsuits, what a loser, he says he only wins, this must mean he was guilty or something. But it's interesting because what it's also showing, if you just take a step back and you don't have this completely negative biased view, is one potential interpretation is that he's willing to put aside his past, the things that people would criticize him for in terms of being too egotistical. Saying, oh, he's so egotistical, he'd never settle a lawsuit, he'll always win and dominate. He's willing to put that aside and say, look, the presidency is much more important. I have bigger battles to win, and, I can change and adapt my attitudes to be able to allow me to be more effective at the job I'm currently in. So I think that's a positive thing, and if you're attacking him for that, what are you saying? Like, you'd rather him hold on to it just because everyone was attacking him for his egotistical temperament, but then as soon as he backs off on that, people attack him for that. So it's quite interesting when you see the criticism of it. But the real point about that is, what I wanted to show you there was that I think these were in the morning. It says, yeah, 5:39 a.m. So these were early in the morning on Saturday, yesterday. Early in the morning. And then, pretty much right after that, I mean, I'm looking at the tweets here, I'll show you. If I can flip it around. Looking at the tweets, it says 5:39 a.m., talking about Trump U. Then, 5:48 a.m., just a few minutes later. 5:56 a.m., a few minutes later. And then this one much later in the next morning, so early this morning. But if you look at these tweets, it says, our wonderful future VP Mike Pence was harassed last night at the theater by the cast of Hamilton, cameras blazing. This should not happen. So right after he's talking about the Trump U, he's talking about Mike Pence being harassed. Then he's talking about the theater must be a safe, special place, obviously alluding perhaps to the shooting of Lincoln, but also using these keywords, a safe and special place, throwing the SJW safe space terminology kind of back in their face, demanding that they apologize. The cast and producers of Hamilton, and this is later this morning, or early this morning, but the next day from this tweet, the cast and producers of Hamilton, which I hear is highly overrated, should immediately apologize for their terrible behavior. And then now he's talking about, pretty much moving on there, talking about what's going on with the transition team, Saturday Night Live, and he's basically seems like he's moved on from discussing both Trump U and the whole Hamilton theater thing. So when I look at all that, especially when you look at the part where he said, the cast and producers of Hamilton, which I hear is highly overrated, should immediately apologize. So he's saying that it's highly overrated. Now that, to be honest, it's an attack on them. It's an insult. So why would the president, if he's so serious and if he's a really, stepping up, why would he do that? Well, there's two explanations. One is, I think he's trying to draw attention away from Trump U. Probably, in my opinion, rightly so. But regardless of it, whether you agree with, the whole point or not, it's brilliant, because what you'll see is, because he made this insult, the media is going to pick up those points, because they'd rather attack his temperament and so forth. They'd rather try to make try to make people think that he's a bully and so forth, than go after the Trump U. And the media can't split their focus. They have to drive a message. They have to choose one thing. And here he gives them two things that they can choose from. Do you want to talk about Trump U, which everybody already knows about, and the fact that I'm settling it as the way he's framing it is showing, hey, I'm ready to move on and take my responsibilities as president very seriously? Or would you rather, talk about, for example, me, Hamilton and all of that? Which one's more dramatic? Which one's more interesting? Which one's more spicy? Which one's more of a controversial topic, in the sense of which one would get more reactions out of people? And so when I look at this, I see that it's kind of like a trollish behavior in a way, but almost masterfully done. Trump knows what he's doing. And, you can easily criticize him and say, well, he's just a big baby and a child, and he's ranting on Twitter and stuff. Or you can realize that he's actually the first president we've had, well, not the first president who understands the media of the day, but he's much more so than Obama, understanding the power of social media and his personal ability to engage with people and shape the narrative according to the way he wants it to, whether you agree or you disagree. The guy is a master communicator. He understands, because he's a salesman. He's a business person. He's an entrepreneur. He understands that people really don't listen to logic and reason. He understands that they respond to emotions, that if you want to persuade somebody, you have to incite emotion. Sounds like my dogs are upset. Someone's talking next door. Sadie, it's okay, girl. It's all right, Macy. They're probably going to bark, but that's okay. The point, though, is that Trump understands that in order to persuade, you have to elicit emotional response from people. And that's the way you drive conversations in terms of sales and persuasion. And would it be nice if our president could speak to all of us logically and rationally? Absolutely. But we can talk in terms of ideals, or we can talk in terms of reality. So if you want to talk in terms of ideals, hey, that's great. But if you actually want to talk about things in terms of reality and what's actually going to have an impact in this world, you have to be honest with yourself about how people think, how people act, what's the motivations behind their actions. And generally people are irrational. Generally people act based on their emotion. And from my perspective, based on my experience, that is due to our education system. It's due, which is reinforced through advertising and so forth, but the seeds are planted when a child is young. So many groups, like the Jesuits, for example. I went to a Jesuit school for high school, but the Jesuits said, give us a child, for the first 7 years, and we've got them for life. I think a famous cultural Marxist said that, you can have anything, you can have, advertising, you can have the economy, all those things, but give us the children in their first 7 years, and eventually we'll own everything, we'll control everything. So I think that the average person will hold our leaders to a standard of logical discourse, rationality, etc., but not be honest with themselves that they don't actually, it's not that they don't care, but they don't themselves actually respond to that. So if you have a person who comes and speaks rationally, people don't listen. This is what I see as the issue of why, for example, Ron Paul could not have won the presidency. I thought he had some really great perspectives, and especially around the Federal Reserve and so forth, but the guy is not a good salesperson. He doesn't know how to persuade and use emotions. And you can make all kinds of principled arguments about, well, you shouldn't do that and engage in that. But the fact is, do you want the world to stay the way it is, or do you want it to change? And if people are going to accept and allow themselves to make decisions emotionally, and you try to come at them with logic, you're not speaking to them. You have to speak to people where they're at. Right now I'm being very logical and emotional, but I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm just sharing my perspective. You can do with it what you want. But the point is, as a politician, as a leader, and you're going to speak to the masses, see, individually, you might find people who can use reason and logic and over time change their mind. I think that's probably very rare, but if you're going to speak to people as a group, in terms of the masses, you're going to lose every time if you're trying to just present arguments rationally and logically, because as a whole, on average, people are not educated to be able to actually think critically, to actually read at a very high level of vocabulary. As I talked about in the last video, the education system is literally dumbing us down. If you don't believe me, well, if you don't believe me, I don't know, you're not honest within yourself about your own experience. And sometimes we want to pretend like, or we want to believe and feel that, we're educated and we're smart, so we'll attack ideas that might threaten that. That's cognitive dissonance. Look at your experience within school. Nobody likes school. The only people who like school are the goody-goodies who do everything they're told so that they can get all A's, and those people who usually are rewarded with high-paying jobs like doctors and lawyers, but their lives are miserable too. They're just as broke as everybody else, just at a higher level. There's a difference between being broke and poor. If you don't understand that, you need to read some Robert Kiyosaki or something. But in terms of our education, the point I was wanting to bring up about the education system is if you want evidence, or if you want to actually kind of educate yourself about the history of the education system, John Taylor Gatto is an excellent person to listen to. He's an award-winning teacher. He worked in the New York school system. He was I think he studied at Columbia at some point. He's a really smart guy. He used to, you've seen the show Mad Men. He was like one of these advertising guys back in the day, in the 60s or whatever. Kind of got tired of it, decided to go teach, and he went to the public schools in New York, was a very good teacher. His students, I think, pretty much across the board loved him. He won State Teacher of the Year and City Teacher of the Year awards many times, and has written a lot of essays and short books, as well as an underground history of compulsory schooling or modern education. I forget the exact title, but you can look it up. Just John Taylor Gatto, Gatto, and then look up Underground History of Education. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube as well that you can take a look at. But he's really cool because he shows the roots of our education system and how it's been designed very specifically to keep people at a certain level of basic literacy, but not critical thinking. Critical thinking is very hard to teach in a systematic, one-size-fits-all way, especially when you have people at all different ability levels all put in the same class. For example, why do we put children all in the same class just because they're the same age? I could take 5 random kids all of the same age, and they're all going to be at different reading levels, different levels of ability to think, and so forth, because they come from different environments. Their parents are different. They've been exposed to a lot of different things. So why don't we group children according to their abilities? That way we can, if a child is below where they should be at, you can actually address that. And that you don't harm the child who's ahead. Or the child who's ahead, you can actually help them go further without having them to have to wait and be bored while you help the kids who are below where they should be. So John Taylor Gatto has a lot of really cool perspective in terms of the education system and so forth. The corporate media, the mainstream media, takes advantage of that. So do advertisers. And as someone pointed out in the comments on the last video on Facebook, the mainstream media is just an arm of the corporate advertising establishment. It's all the same thing. It's just advertising, really. And I guess the real point there is that when I look at Trump and I look at how he communicates on Twitter, it's brilliant. He's not just talking to talk. He's not just reacting. It can be interpreted as a reaction, but regardless of that, it's a very specific reaction that I think, just from looking at it, is very specifically planned and done, actually in order to elicit specific reactions from the mainstream media and from people in general. Because ultimately, if you and I don't watch the mainstream media and you don't follow him on Twitter, you probably would never hear it. So he knows that the mainstream media is going to report on it, and I think we'll see a lot more of that. I hope more interaction from him on Twitter, because it's pretty interesting. It's actually the only reason I'm really still on Twitter, is to see what he has to say and the comments about it and so forth. So I just wanted to share that. It's a pretty interesting thing. I encourage you to follow him at Real Donald Trump on Twitter if you're not on there. I also generally post his tweets on our MAGA News Facebook page, so if you're not liking that on Facebook yet, go ahead and check that out. Follow us on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already know. Well, I'll have to post a link if you're watching this on Facebook. But thanks for checking it out, and leave your comments below. I'm interested to hear other people's perspective. This is just my perspective on the situation. But should be some interesting things to come, and there's still like 50 plus days till the guy's even president. So once he enters office, I think it's going to be really interesting. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.